And we are live. JT here, and welcome to the huddle. The huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you, whether you are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, or whether you are listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focused on the here and the now. And I guarantee you, you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. Like many ideas, I find they're best inspired ideas when you act on them. So I reached out to him recently and just thought, hey, would you like to come on the huddle and have a conversation? And being the amazing human being he said, absolutely. My guest in the huddle today is currently serving as the president with Canadian Tire Jumpstarts Charities. My guest in the huddle today is Marco Di Buono. How are you today, Marco,
I'm
sorry.
great, JT. I'm great. How are you?
Great, great. As I was sharing before we've kicked off and went live here, just having a day filled with wonderful conversation. So I'm really looking forward to ours.
Same here.
Okay. Before we get kicked off, Marco, I just want to take a moment to count my blessings. And for me, this is a daily practice. Some days I do it better than others, but I do find the days where I'm most intentional, that I'm most consistent counting my blessings. I do find those days are filled with a more love, a little more joy, a little more peace. And I'm a big believer, biggest blessing you can give anyone is your time and your energy. So I just want to thank you again for blessing us with some of your time and energy here today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you, JT. I appreciate that.
Okay. So one of the things that I often like to do in the huddle is to remind others, and more importantly, myself, that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. I'm curious, what's an interesting fact that maybe a lot of people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community today?
Oh my gosh, that's a good one. Hey, I'm getting up there in age. I turned 50 earlier this year, so there are plenty of interesting facts that have probably accumulated over time. But I'll throw this one out to your audience. So I had the privilege of serving as a media spokesperson when I worked for the Heart and Stroke Foundation in Ontario many years ago now. But one of the things that serendipitously happened as a result of that is I got invited to be on the Dr. Oz show. So that was before he went a little sideways with his thinking. He was still very much an evidence-based medical practitioner at the time. And I got to say, the experience was wild. Getting flown to New York City, appearing on the show, live studio audience, all that. Like, it was crazy. And then, seeing yourself on this show after the fact, it was all very wild. But what an honor to be able to share some insights on behalf of the foundation on this, mega platform. So that was pretty cool. But that's the nugget I'll share.
Uh, I'm curious. That sounds like a beautiful experience. I'm sure it probably prompted some reflection and gratitude for being able to be to have that opportunity. I'm curious. Was there anything that kind of stuck out with you on during that entire experience that still resonates with you today?
Yeah, you know what? That's a really great question, JT. So, going into that, you think, all right, they're going to do their due diligence. They're going to make sure that not an iota of what I say is offline, and they're going to, fact check and all this stuff. The pre-screening interview and the information I shared in the pre-screening interview was effectively the script that we followed, like verbatim. And it was a real eye-opening experience for me because I realized, you know what? I can't depend on anyone else to make sure that things I'm saying are, I need to make sure that I am confident and I've done the due diligence
Mm,
to make sure that what I am saying and putting out there for others to consume is accurate. I cannot depend on someone else to do that. And I have to take that responsibility. So that was a powerful manifestation of that. I was glad that I had, but because it could have gone sideways pretty quickly
yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah. It's interesting, and why that resonates with me. One of the intentions I set when I started this podcast was to have organic, free flowing conversations. And I know for some people's comfort level, they're totally cool with that. Others are a little bit more guarded. And so it's interesting. But I guess where I'm getting at is I can appreciate now that you've been on that platform, you've been in kind of that one where what you're sharing is public consumption. Here, it's like, you know, it's easy.
Well, easy for sure. Well, easy because this is going to be a fun conversation, but it's
Yeah.
also, you learn to never be complacent, right?
Yeah.
No matter how many times you do this, you just learn never go in unprepared, or at least
Mhm.
thinking through what you're going to say. And it's an important lesson, right? Because you can easily lose sight of that thing. I've got the experience. I've done, whatever it may be, whether it's media interviews or whether it's, coaching or whether it's parenting. To learn to how not to be complacent about things is
Mhm.
an important lesson, because that's where the mistakes start to happen.
Mm. I love that. And again, great reminder on, patience, right? Responsiveness, pausing. So a lot of great nuggets there. So I'm curious, Marco, you have a diverse background, right, in health and wellness, right? Like again, you achieved and you were your PhD in nutritional sciences at U of T, and you've kind of gone into the research. You've been a spokesperson. You've really worked in the health and wellness field. And then in 2015, you moved on to Jumpstart. And then in 2022, you shifted into this new role as the president of Jumpstart. I'm curious, you've had a diverse path. You've obviously physical activity has played an important role for you in your life. I'm curious, what has been a lesson that you've taken from sport, from physical activity? And again, I know there's many that you find yourself still applying to other areas of your life today.
Hmm. That's again really really great question. Yeah, I could get cheeky and start to refer to all these movie sound bites, inspirational speeches made in many movies about sport, but at the end of the day, um, it's I think that the thing that I find most powerful about sport is it's a bit of an underdog, more broadly speaking, right? Like sport has the power to do many things that we don't recognize, and we approach it a little bit superficially. Like fandom is awesome, and it uniting communities, or this notion of teamwork that we get if we've played sports at a young age and we've made friends for life. But there's so many more powerful things about sport, and I think I would say the thing that I've learned through sport is not to underestimate the power of its utility, to help people become the best version of themselves.
And it's interesting. It's like you said, like there's all these, sport. If you look at it at a very superficial level, there's lots of great things that happen, right? Like or we might talk about, it teaches us hard work, teamwork. But really, and it sounds like for you, it's sort of just an understanding that it's simply a vehicle to teach and reinforce greater life lessons that transcend really, on field, on the ice, on the court.
Absolutely. At its simplest and purest level, it can be the hook that creates a fun, you know, open environment where people have a more of a growth mindset, and
Mm,
are willing to, push themselves to become the best version that's inside them. On a deep level, you can really use it as a tool to advance tackle mental health or physical health and well-being, or really tackle societal issues, or as we learned during the pandemic, use it as a vehicle for social justice.
Mm.
So, depending on how deep you want to leverage it as a tool, it has the power to be very transformative at an individual level as well as a societal level. And it's to our detriment that in North America we don't view sport through that lens as much as we do, sport as a professional endeavor and as an aspirational endeavor. In many parts of the world where there are far deeper societal issues at play, sport as a tool for social development, for community development, is a far more entrenched tool than it is here in North America. We're getting there. When you start talking about sports through the lens of human rights, as our sport minister has recently, or when you talk about tackling inequities in sport with different approaches, the way the PWHL and Project 8, the domestic soccer league, are planning to do, you start to unpack some of that power in sport. But it's in its infancy here in Canada and North America, this notion of sport for development, compared to where it is in many other parts of the world.
Mm. And I appreciate you sharing and reminding all of us about, the power of sport. And, I know Nelson Mandela, talked about, has the power, and I'll sort of paraphrase, to transform, right, lives and really be a catalyst to change. And it's interesting as you share that, because I think of what you're doing now and helping to lead the change through Jumpstart, that a lot of, what you do is to help sort of address some of these societal, we'll call them barriers, right, to where people can actually get involved in physical activity and sport. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what inspired you to join Jumpstart, with the preface being you've spent time in the research side of things, right? Academically, you were a spokesperson, and now sort of leading the change for probably arguably one of the biggest charitable organizations in terms of sport, physical activity, removing barriers. Yeah, I'm curious, what inspired you to embark on this journey?
You would have to go way back in the time tunnel, to be honest. And I know on the surface, my career looks like it's been all over the map, but to me, there's always been a thread that unifies it. If I go back to when I was, a teenager and thinking about what I would do in university, I had this dream of being a pediatrician, right? And like, many aspiring young people who dream of a career in medicine. It didn't happen for me, but I had a choice. I could, throw all that aside and figure out what I was going to do with my life, and after my undergraduate degree, or I could kind of try to unpack what it was about medicine that I really wanted to, that appealed to me. And it dawned on me that it was really child and youth wellness and well-being that was my North Star. And I wouldn't have articulated back then this way, right? But that's what kind of appealed to me. And so I embarked on a career path that allowed me to always keep that North Star in sight. I pursued a PhD not because I had the intention of becoming an academic, but I had already finished an undergraduate degree. I didn't want to go back and go to business school or anything like that. So I thought, where can I acquire skills that will be just as comparable and just as robust? And I thought, well, I'm going to go to graduate school. I'm going to treat it differently. I'm going to think of designing a clinical trial as project management. And I'm going to, think of being a TA as people management. And I'm going to think of, all the writing skills and communication skills that I'm going to acquire. And I'm going to use that as the justification for going to graduate school. And then when I was looking for my first career opportunity with a nutrition degree, it was around the time that the food industry in North America was being vilified for its role in childhood obesity. And I thought, now, naively, mind you, in hindsight, but I thought, what if I go to work in the food industry? What if I can make some change in the food industry and try to harness its force for better? And so I made that career decision. And when that didn't quite, meet my expectations, I thought, okay, well, where else can I employ my skills and still, help child health and wellness, and the not-for-profit sector was an obvious choice, particularly in the health charitable sector. And then, you fast forward, you can draw that line from my initial desire to be or dreams to be a pediatrician to where I am now, which is wielding the power of sport to improve the health and well-being. And it's really not just health, it's what that well-being word needs to be unpacked, right? For kids and youth from coast to coast to coast. And I could not be happier. I honestly think I have the best job at all of Canadian Tire Corporation, to be honest with you, because I get up every day and I just, my team and I think of what do we do next to be better, to help one more kid be successful.
I love that. And, a number of things we could probably just unpack there and create a whole different episode. I love at the start how you talked about you viewed going to graduate school, how you reframed it as an opportunity to gain valuable skills, right? That's powerful. Again, just reminder of, again, your growth mindset. And it was interesting how you sort of drew this theme around, child and youth well-being, right? And why it resonates with me is similar to you. I've had a diverse, career path. I was 15 years in education, went to entrepreneurship, came back into this nonprofit world, with Football Ontario. So it's really interesting how, again, if I were to look back at the journey, as Steve Jobs says, connect the dots, you can only connect the dots going backwards. You start to realize what actually about those three industries actually drove me. So I'm curious from your perspective, as you've embarked in your journey, as you've become more clear that, child and youth well-being is really where your heart is in creating solutions. What have you discovered? Like have there been some wins, either your time at Jumpstart or previously to Jumpstart?
Oh, there've been lots of wins, and lots of learnings, right? And preconceived notions that have been completely thrown out the door. Like, I'll give you an example. Worked at the Heart and Stroke Foundation here, and as a Canadian, as Canadians, we like to think that we live to perhaps a higher standard than our fellows, our brothers and sisters in the United States. And when I was going through my academic training, you start to realize, there's a reason they've got Ivy League institutions and whatnot. Like, these are heavyweight institutions, and they bring them to bear, and they do really good work, and they've got systems in place to really understand the health and well-being journey of they don't necessarily pan out for the better, but at least they've got systems in place to try and help the discussion. Then you make the transition in the not-for-profit space, and I start to see, you think we've got to be doing better. I mean, socially, our country is more progressive. But I had an opportunity that was very serendipitous. My wife was given an opportunity with her employer at the time to move to the U.S. for a short time. The kids and I followed suit, and I had to find a new job. By sheer chance, the job I ended up finding was with the American Heart Association. And wow, was that an eye-opening experience, because here I thought, yeah, I've got Canadian not-for-profit experience. We must do things better. I was immediately humbled by that misperception. The level of rigor and discipline and data-driven decision-making that was embedded in this organization that thought of itself like a Fortune 500 company, not like a charitable organization in need of public support, was just unbelievably powerful for me. It really changed my perception of what the segmentation between not-for-profit and for-profit looks like, to the point where I had already started really studying and getting deep into Porter's thesis of the firm as a social institution, or the evolution of corporate social responsibility. That whole experience at American Heart was so powerful that I made the decision early on that when we were going to move back to Canada, I wanted to make the transition back into the for-profit space, but for an organization that had a very clear social purpose. And so I would consider that a major win. The fact that one of my own preconceived notions, one that I'm sure I share with many Canadians, that we are better than our counterparts in the United States, was completely obliterated.
Mhm.
Is what forced me to approach the role that I'm in with more humility,
Mhm.
but also with a deep desire to build the same kind of discipline and rigor around data-driven decision making, which in sport, as you know, not a sector that's accustomed to using data to make decisions. So that I would consider that whole revelation a major win.
Mhm. And it's interesting you share that. Just again, coming in this nonprofit world's been interesting because, spending time nonprofit, then going in for profit, then nonprofit, it really has helped me to understand, like you said, the power of, you know, verified data, right?
Yeah.
Because I found that it's really easy that we all have these lived experiences, which again has helped us form these preconceived notions. But I always remind myself, like, numbers don't lie, right? Numbers are factual, they're based, and they actually just provide a snapshot to give us feedback on where we are, and they're a quick measure. So I can definitely appreciate the value of great data.
Yeah. And the other nice benefit, having had some experience outside of Canada, is that you come back and you don't necessarily, you're obviously going to be proud of what your country accomplishes, but you don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that we know better or we know best. And so even in my role at Jumpstart, ever since coming on as president, I've encouraged my team to look outside of our borders for examples of how we can adapt ideas that might advance our work here in Canada. And it's proven very successful. We've cultivated strong relationships with the UK in particular, with a lot of organizations that do great sport for development work, that were kind of born out of the 2012 Olympics, to really advance community sport and well-being. And it's really served us well because we've brought some innovative ideas back here that we've tried to co-adapt with a lot of our domestic partners, and we're excited to launch some new things in the new year. So that experience of making sure we always have the right amount of humility, as we approach and engage with others, was incredibly powerful, incredibly
Mm.
powerful.
So it sounds like there's been sort of this shift on best practices about seeing how others are creating wins and then sharing it, okay, getting a better standard, then sort of make it your own.
Absolutely. And the window of what constitute, or the sandbox of what constitute best practices, like it's to our detriment that collectively we don't often think, well, there's a planet of billions of us, like why do we just close the box on a country of 38 million? We should be looking far afield for where those
Yeah.
best practices may be, and not carry preconceived notions that um, we know better in developed nations about how to do this work.
Mhm. Mhm. Powerful reminder on approaching every situation, every person with an open mind and an open heart. Okay. Um, so I'm curious, you mentioned around this idea that, sport physical activity is a great catalyst to create, societal change. You know, obviously coming out of the last few years, which again, everyone's experience has been different, but we all experience a lot of change in the way daily life looks. I'm curious, what has really been firing up Jumpstart in terms of like, okay, here's where we're going. Like, has any inspired idea really been pushing the envelope for the Jumpstart family?
Um, I wouldn't say so much an idea um, as a bit of a cultural shift that we
Mm,
noticed coming out of the pandemic. So I think if you would have asked us in 2019 or early 2020, you know, can you characterize what the sports system in Canada looks like? We would have had, like, just like everyone else, variations on the theme, but yeah, you've got these organizations national bodies and they've got provincial counterparts, and you kind of have the government loosely governing it all, and you've got these community clubs that create this ecosystem, and at the grassroots level, and they kind of schools don't talk to clubs and clubs don't talk to non-profits, and nobody talks to parks and recreation, and we couldn't be more wrong, and thinking it's a top-down approach, right? It's the governing bodies at the national level that kind of decide what sport looks like in this country. And then you had the pandemic, and you had a social justice revolution happening as a result, at the same time. I wouldn't say as a result, but at the same time. And underpinning that social justice revolution, you had a lot of groups deciding, you know what, we're going to take this into our own hands. We don't need a national body telling us what sport looks like for our community. We're going to decide what sport looks like for our community. And a lot of self-determination emanating from the bottom up, the grassroots up now. And the number of loosely organized groups that started to emerge post-pandemic, I wouldn't call them not-for-profits because they didn't have that status. They were definitely not charities. They were definitely not clubs that were sanctioned by anybody. They were just really passionate people who wanted to harness the power of sport for good. And that got us really excited because we're like, we got to go out and find these organizations. Like we can't make the assumption that they know who we are or they know who Sport Canada, and they probably don't even care who Sport Canada is. But we got to go out and find these organizations and provide them with supports and help them with build capacity and help them with resources to kind of sustain the work that they're doing, because at the end of the day, isn't that the work we want to sustain, the work that's born out of a community? So that got us super fired up, and to the point where coming out of the pandemic, it was one of the inputs that inspired us to create our sport relief fund, which was like this over a year and a half. It was like, I think now got to get the number right. I think it was about $24 million that we poured into the sports system when nobody else was doing it at the grassroots level. And that suddenly kind of galvanized Jumpstart as a real influential organization nationally, but at the grassroots level, where there was no influential organization supporting these organizations. And we took that role very seriously. We think of ourselves as a convener. We think of ourselves as a steward of this amazing fluid ecosystem made up of thousands and thousands of organizations. And now we're able to, because we have this bigger view of what the sports system looks like at community, we're able to connect the dots. So organizations looking to do good work, we can connect them with others in different parts of the country, bring them together, help them share, help them learn. Like that's the stuff. Connecting the country through sport is what's getting us jazzed up right now. And we talked about data. The amount of insight we get from having access to this amazing ecosystem of different organizations delivering sport in different ways at the community level has completely changed our view as to what role we can play, and other organizations with of our similar to ours can do to really sustain this over the long term for the well-being of Canadians.
I love how you brought up the idea of capacity, and why it resonates is, I know you were saying earlier, sometimes, especially when we talk about sport, we often think of the professional side of sport, right? Where, you see the NHL, the NFL, the CFL, although NBA, you see everything there. But really the catalyst to change, as you were highlighting, is at the grassroots. And very often at the grassroots, you are dealing with passionate people who are volunteering and giving others their time, their energy, often at out of cost out of their own pocket, just because they want to, sort of share some of those lessons with others. So I love that you're sort of focusing on the grassroots as a way to sort of support those people, whether it's through relief funds, whether it's providing resources. because that's really where that catalyst of change starts, right? At the grassroots.
100%. We always, oh, when we engage with these organizations, we meet the leaders who are doing this work and who've had the inspiration to do something different. We don't want to make the assumption that we know what they need or whether they even want our support. So we always ask the open-ended question, how can we help?
Mhm.
Right. And what's really cool about that is it immediately, like, we're very mindful, especially, coming out of that kind of social revolution that happened during the pandemic, to not convey that we're in any position of control or authority. We are very much at the service of the organizations who are delivering the work in their communities. And we really try to convey that. So not just through our words, but also through our actions. We try to make our applications very simple and straightforward. We don't put big obligations on the organizations that receive our support. We don't expect them to slap our logo on absolutely everything. It's nice that they do, because then we can go out and get more support and do more work. But
Yeah.
it's not like we're asking them to center us in their work. We're trying to, and in fact, we even center their storytelling in our storytelling, because we want to amplify their work, not necessarily ours, sometimes to our detriment. But it's really important that we demonstrate this servant attitude to the organizations that we're supporting, because that's what we're there for. We are not in any position of control or authority. We can help move the needle by making decisions around who receives our support, but we're not going to create barriers for the organizations that are most in need, and demonstrating the most innovative approaches to using sport as a tool for personal and professional development.
Mm. I love that. And I just love the simplicity of your question. How can we help?
It's a very simple words, but it unpacks so much for these because they really think through, well, let me think about that, and sometimes they tell you it's actually not funding it. Can you provide us with volunteers, or do you have anyone who can help us build a website? Or sometimes they have a gap, being able to connect with a community leader in their community who can help advance a policy issue. And we do what we can where we can. I use the analogy: if we can reach the door handle, we will at least try to open the door. And that's the best we can do.
Hmm. It's interesting as you share that. And, what came up as you said that was it's easy sometimes to assume we know what people need, but really, it's really helping discover actually what people need. And then it's finding, hey, we'll do our best to support you, and if we can, great. If we're unsure, then hey, maybe we have a community partner that is better suited to helping you. So I really appreciate that, because it really just reminded me to again, just go in, don't assume that you know what they need. Just ask and be open to hearing it.
Yeah, and for Jumpstart, the great thing about Jumpstart, and one of the reasons I absolutely adore, and I'm so proud and so fortunate to work here, is we've got the backing of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but not just the backing of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Stakeholders at every level, whether it's the dealers who, the Canadian Tire dealers in 500 stores across the country, or the staff at Sport Check and Marks, who are the frontline ambassadors for Jumpstart in their communities, or the executives and employees here at the head office in Toronto, or at the head office or at the offices in Calgary. We have tens of thousands of people who also want to be able to support the groups that Jumpstart has a privilege of helping. And so we have a ton of different resources and capabilities that we can bring to bear. As a charity, it's not typical that you would have a massive supply chain distribution network at your disposal to mobilize resources, or one of the most amazing IT and intelligent automation teams to help solve technical challenges, or an employee base, again, tens of thousands that can serve as a volunteer army. Like, the number of resources we have at our disposal, and they're all there. That's one of the things I love about Jumpstart. It is so ingrained in the ethos of Canadian Tire, along with many other community-based initiatives, that it really sets us apart, because we can truly listen and work with our partners to understand what their needs are and what resources we can then mobilize beyond just the financial supports.
Mm. It's interesting. I never would have thought about that, but it is well positioned Jumpstart, just based on who the what businesses are connected to it. Like, yeah, it does actually, there are so many different touch points, and that actually creates efficiencies. So you have multiple ways to help and support people.
Exactly. And it allows us to be innovative and inventive. Like, we're constantly, now the most recent thing is I'm telling the team, what's the Venn diagram intersect between all of these capabilities we have within the charity and the corporation, and the programs that we might be able to really, use to get at the root cause of some of the challenges in sport. And it's forcing the team to think very differently about how we can innovate, because we don't have a small sandbox at all. Our sandbox is actually quite big when you think about it. If you take a capabilities view to how we can approach the work that we do at a community level, and then you overlay on top of that the relationships we're building with organizations in the US and the UK and elsewhere to help inform what best practices look like. We always come out of these meetings with thinking, we can do that. We can modify that this way using these resources and these capabilities, but yeah, we can do that. Mm-hmm. And isn't that a great idea that, we can be able to use to solve problem X, Y, or Z? So it really does give us a plethora of opportunities to think about how to innovate not just for the sake of innovation, but to really advance the use of sport as a powerful tool for social change.
Mm. I'm curious, have you noticed anything coming out of the last few years? Like you said, you've seen an influx of people, passionate people that just are doing the work, right? That might not have ties to other, and again, the true essence of grassroots sports. Are you noticing any, sports or any sort of initiatives that you're seeing that maybe weren't as visible pre-pandemic, but now coming out, you see, oh, okay, this idea is growing, this sector is growing, this sport's growing.
So a general tendency to repatriate what a sport looks like for a particular community, right? So, and again, let's take hockey as an example. It is to our own detriment if we continue to think of hockey as 5-a-side with a goalie, full sheet of ice, 20-minute periods, 3-period. Like, there are many communities, there are many organizations that are now redefining, not just, like top down, but with the support, like this very much a for us, by us approach, right? With the kids that they're serving, what does hockey actually look like? And you know what? As if you believe when you set foot on the ice, or it doesn't even have to be ice, that you are playing hockey, then who are we to tell you differently? Right? And so it's taking ownership back at the very heart of communities about what every single sport looks like. There's this cool movement happening globally called mixed ability sport, as an example. And on one hand, it's definitely a solution to allow for, persons with disabilities to continue enjoying sport at the community level. But most importantly, I think this is a revolutionary way to get everybody back engaged in sport. Think of the weekend warrior who can't play rugby anymore because they hurt their knee when they were in their 20s, or the person who just doesn't have the physical strength to be able to play a full game of rugby in the traditional way. Well, mixed abilities rugby which is, taking off here in Canada, quite frankly, quite aggressively, is a great opportunity to just get all kinds of people who love rugby playing a modified version of the game together.
Mm-hmm.
Different demographic groups, persons with disabilities, persons without, persons with injuries, persons without, skilled rugby players, amateurs, all on the same pitch playing a game, and they're all playing rugby.
Yeah.
As an example, right? So it's just people taking ownership of what sport looks like for them. That's the trend we're seeing, which is really exciting.
So cool. And I think it's really cool on a number of different levels. One, in terms of long-term athlete development, right? That sort of active for life, supporting people wherever they are in the journey. But as you know, I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here. The longer we keep people physically active and involved in sport in some capacity, their well-being, right? We have the potential to actually improve well-being.
Exactly.
And the other interesting thing is, I think of, if I'm putting my Football Ontario hat on, we've seen this innovation coming out of the pandemic. It's just opening people to the idea. It doesn't have to be 12 on 12. We can do 6 on 6. We can do 9 versus 9. We can do flag. We can do tackle, men, women, anyone in the BIPOC community, right? New immigrants. Like it's totally just reimagining what sport could look like.
Exactly. And recognizing that there is no one entity that owns sport. Sport belongs to the person participating in it.
Yeah.
And so you're really kind of seeing that take shape, and it's very exciting to see. Are we ever going to get rid of the formal sports system? No. And should we? No. A colleague that I know makes the analogy between school and university. It is, the two things can coexist. We can have a wonderful publicly funded K-12 system in every part of the country to make sure that everyone comes out of it with the necessary skills to go on in life. But on the same token, you can also have, research intensive universities that are creating groundbreaking discovery. Well, the same is true. That analogy holds in sport. You can have an ecosystem that is there to cultivate lifelong love of sport, physical activity, and recreation, while still having a system that on occasion finds the individuals who have an interest, but also the ability to excel at a different level and put them on a national or global stage. Those two things can coexist. It's not about having one system or the other, but having systems that learn how to coexist.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as you share that, you just sort of painted this picture of it's really about reimagining what success looks like. That success is not one linear path. Success looks, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely. Now you couldn't have lobbed me a softer softball on that one. So one of the really exciting things that we're going to be announcing in the new year is this project that we are supporting called the Rethink Sport Hub, and it is meant to be like a think tank, with a lot of the leading academics in the sports space, supported by Jumpstart, but not owned by Jumpstart by any stretch of the imagination. We want representatives from the governing bodies there. We want representatives from grassroots there to input, but it's meant to be almost like a knowledge hub of all the great things that are happening in sport in Canada and internationally that can serve as a library of best practices, but also as a place where you can go and say, hey, I got this idea. Do you think it'll work? Yeah, let's test it out. Let's see if it will, and let's see how we can implement that most efficiently and with the biggest outcomes possible. So it is about rethinking what sport looks like. But it's going to be I would bet the farm, so to speak, that what we're going to come out with is the most effective system is a patchwork quilt of different systems that communicate fluidly with each other and interact with each other and codepend on one another, but not a bunch of standalone things that are not supported well at all. So we're excited about it.
Okay. Well, you just threw me a nice big lob at softball. Again, if it sounds like Jumpstart's up to a lot of innovative projects. What you just shared with the think tank, piques my curiosities. I'm enthused to kind of see how that unfolds. Love the idea of collaboration, masterminding, sharing best practices. Um, is there a way for people to learn more, or just even if they maybe just want to see what Jumpstart's up to, maybe they want to get involved in some capacity, what's the best way people can, start?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to just follow us on our social channels, because that's the most fluid environment, right? Websites are great, but they're pretty static. We try to keep ours up to date with reports and data and things like that, but we'll push all of that out on our social channels. So I would encourage everyone to follow us on Instagram or X or LinkedIn, or even Facebook, and you'll learn all kinds of opportunities that exist to get involved more with the charity. But also you'll learn about the work that we're doing and some of the resources that are available, because that's where we'll push it out. So definitely follow us on those social channels and engage with us, interact with us. We love that.
Awesome. And I'll be happy to share any of those social handles in the description, on YouTube, on Facebook, or on the podcast. And I definitely know that Jumpstart has definitely jumped, no pun intended, to the top of the mind when we saw sort of the NFL pushing out that My Cleat, My Cause campaign, and Nathan Rourke pushed it out. So I feel like Jumpstart is kind of front and center after that video site kind of went out across, the football spaces. So okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so Marco, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for the great man you are, right? The great husband, the great dad, the great leader, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are. In the short time we've known each other, especially through this conversation, you really get a sense of the deep responsibility you feel to use sport and physical activity as a way to be a catalyst to create social change. So I just want to thank you for being the change and being a shining example in this world.
I really appreciate that, JT. As I said, I am. So it gets me up in the morning, and I have such a privilege to be able to work for this organization and steward all of its invaluable resources to do good, and it makes me very proud. So thank you for that.
It's all good, brother. So, folks, Marco dropped so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. But as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's a consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates greater results. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness, you are worthy of greatness, and you are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations, if it resonated with you, if it touched your heart, then please share it with a friend, a loved one, a teammate, just someone you feel would benefit from listening to these positive, inspiring, and empowering ideas. The more people we have listening, understanding, and applying these simple principles to their life, the more blessed this world will be. As always, love having these conversations with you in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day.